The skyline of Seoul glowed beyond the windows as Naomi Carter said the 5 words that would destroy everything between them. Teach me how to seduce men. Dae-hyun Lee, Korean tech billionaire and her best friend since childhood, felt his world tilt because the one woman he'd been hiding his feelings for just asked him to help her attract someone else. What she didn't know was that every lesson he agreed to teach would be torture, and the man she was trying to learn to seduce was already hopelessly, desperately in love with her. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. And if you're ready for a story that'll have you screaming at your screen, smash that like button and let's dive in. The skyline of Seoul glowed against the darkness beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dae-hyun Lee's penthouse. The metropolis pulsed with energy below. Horns echoed through the streets. Distant melodies floated across the Han River, and electric billboards flashed in every shade imaginable. Inside, though, silence ruled except for the gentle notes of cigarettes after sex drifting from the sound system. Stretched across his leather sofa was Naomi Carter, barefoot, with her legs curled beneath her, drowning in a baggy sweatshirt that made her look smaller than she was. She appeared completely comfortable, as if these walls belonged to her too. She wasn't the Korean tech genius who owned this place, though. She was the daughter of an American ambassador who'd been storming into his existence since childhood. For Dae-hyun, this scene was nothing new. Naomi had been invading his personal space since she was 7, scattering chip bags across his furniture and pillaging his kitchen like she owned the lease. She was uncontained energy, wrapped in giggles, mayhem dressed in boldness. Tonight, however, her question stole the breath from his body. Dae-hyun, she said, gaze fixed upward. Will you show me how to make a guy actually see me? Dae-hyun went rigid, his whiskey glass suspended midway to his mouth. Say that one more time. You know exactly what I said. She bolted upright suddenly, black coils springing in every direction. Her deep brown eyes found his, earnest yet playful. I'm 23, Day, 23. By now, I should understand how attraction works, shouldn't I? Instead, guys treat me like their buddy. Nobody looks at me romantically. And truthfully, she pulled at her cuff. It's getting old. I need that to shift. He studied her, pulse suddenly hammering too hard. Naomi wanting male attention was terrible enough, but Naomi requesting his guidance, that was agony. You're asking me to coach you, he said carefully, placing his drink aside. On seduction? Precisely, she beamed, totally oblivious to the grenade she'd just lobbed into his lap. Who's more qualified than you? You've been in relationships since we were teens. You understand what men respond to. Plus, you know me inside out, so you won't hold back the truth. Dae-hyun ran fingers through his dark hair, fighting to keep his expression blank. She had zero understanding of what she was requesting, unless she did and was deliberately tormenting him. Naomi, he said eventually, tone measured. You don't require instruction. She snorted. That's rich coming from the guy who's had women interested since puberty. Simple for you to claim. He shifted closer, standing above her now, tall enough that she had to crane her neck upward to maintain eye contact. You believe men overlook you? She rolled her eyes. Absolutely. I've been a ghost since arriving here, except when they need someone for their gaming squad. Dae-hyun lowered himself to her level, close enough that her vanilla body mist filled his senses. Perhaps you're not a ghost, he said softly. Perhaps you've simply been watching the wrong people. Her expression faltered for a fraction of a second. Then she laughed and pushed against his arm. Oh, please, Day, keep your poetry for the actual lessons. You're being ridiculous. He manufactured a smile, though something twisted painfully behind his ribs. She assumed this was entertainment. She had no comprehension of his sincerity. "All right," he said, rising to his feet. "If you're requesting lessons, I'll provide them. Just don't hold me responsible when this gets messy." Naomi's grin suggested she'd just claimed victory. "Perfect. Starting tomorrow then, instructor, and no holding back." As she settled back against the cushions, absorbed in her phone, Dae-hyun poured himself another measure and consumed it quickly. He couldn't fathom that he'd just committed to this disaster. Teaching Naomi to captivate men when she'd already captivated the only one who truly counted. And if she ever discovered the truth, he wasn't certain what would collapse first, his composure or his soul. The following evening, Naomi positioned herself before the full-length mirror in Dae-hyun's master suite, appearing as though she wanted to vanish into thin air. "These are basically torture devices," she grumbled, teetering in stilettos. Whose brilliant idea was it that suffering equals beauty? Behind her, Dae-hyun rested against the doorway, arms folded, shirt sleeves pushed to his elbows, mouth curved in that maddening half-smile. "They're stilettos, Naomi, not bear traps. Move without looking like you're crossing a tightrope." She shot daggers at his reflection, spoken like someone whose footwear doesn't plot against him. She attempted another step and nearly crashed forward. But Dae-hyun moved faster. His palms caught her sides, anchoring her, drawing her backward against him. For a moment that stretched too long. They remained frozen, her spine pressed to his torso, his grip secure on her waist. Her breathing stuttered. "Easy," he breathed, voice dropping near her temple. "You're resisting them. Trust the design." She inhaled shakily and pulled away with an unsteady laugh. "You're starting to sound like an inspirational calendar," he smirked, though his attention stayed fixed a heartbeat too long. The instruction didn't end there. By midnight, Naomi wore a fitted dress she insisted was suffocating her, subtle makeup that sharpened her features, and waves cascading around her shoulders just so. She hardly knew the woman in the reflection. "Damn," she breathed, "I actually look grown up." "You look lethal," Dae-hyun amended, eyes travelling over her deliberately. Naomi blushed and deflected with a theatrical salute. "Okay, what comes next, Professor Lee?" "Flirtation," he said without humour. Her eyes went wide. "With you. Unless you'd prefer practising on a stranger." His smirk deepened. She groaned. "Wonderful. Let's do this." She faced him, attempting what she hoped passed for seductive. "So, Dae-hyun, are you into spicy food?" Dae-hyun broke into genuine laughter, nearly bending over. "That's your opening? Cuisine? Everyone appreciates good food," she protested, face warming. He grinned and advanced until barely any space remained between them. Lesson 1. Avoid discussing meals. Lesson 2. Maintain focus. His stare locked onto hers, unwavering, penetrating, absolute. Naomi attempted to reciprocate, but her heartbeat went haywire. Her mouth opened slightly. She broke away first. "Notice!" Dae-hyun's tone descended lower. "You retreated." She pressed against his chest lightly, rattled. "That's not fair. You've got those ridiculous eyes, that annoyingly flawless face, flawless hair, flawless entire package." Flawless entire package. His brow lifted. Naomi froze, processing her own words. "Don't let it inflate your ego, Lee Dae-hyun." But the expression he wore told her that ship had already sailed. A week dissolved, each session more treacherous than before. At a coffee house, he instructed her to acknowledge strangers with warmth. She knocked over her entire latte. At a noribang, he coached her through casual, physical contact. She accidentally jabbed someone's shoulder blade. But every failure drew deeper laughter from Dae-hyun, and every laugh made Naomi's chest constrict in unfamiliar ways. One evening, after yet another catastrophe, Naomi flopped onto his sofa, face buried in cushions. "Face reality, Day. I'm a lost cause. I'll end up alone with 50 rescue cats." He settled beside her, near enough that their legs touched, his voice gentled. "You're not a lost cause, Naomi. Men notice you constantly. The issue is you never register their interest. You've been searching for someone who doesn't exist." She raised her head, examining him. "And who does exist?" "The right one." His eyes darkened. For one dangerous instant, he nearly confessed it, me. But he reclined instead, concealing everything beneath that practiced smile. "You'll recognize him when you catch him watching you constantly." Naomi chuckled softly, completely oblivious that he was speaking about himself, and as she nestled deeper into the cushions, chattering about what strategy to attempt next, Daehyun's chest constricted with an ache that felt physical. Instructing her on capturing male interest was destroying him gradually, because every single session only reinforced the same reality. She didn't need to discover how to make someone desire her. She'd already made him desire her, intensely, entirely, without remedy. The neon glow of Gangnam illuminated Naomi's newly arranged curls as she entered the packed nightclub, conviction evident in her stride, spine straight, precisely as Daehyun had demonstrated. For the first time in forever, she wasn't wearing her standard uniform of sweatpants and an oversized hoodie that drowned her frame. This evening, Daehyun had insisted she wear the form-fitting navy blouse and sleek black pants he'd deliberately chosen, the ensemble that somehow achieved being both understated and striking, refined yet sharp, accentuating her figure in ways that made Naomi feel like she was inhabiting someone else's identity, experimenting with a version of herself she'd never quite accepted as real. "Okay," she murmured to herself, surveying the space with thinly veiled anxiety, fingers twisting together. "This is the genuine challenge. Time to discover if your training actually translates beyond theory, beyond the security of rehearsal." Next to her, Daehyun straightened his cufflinks, the platinum ones his grandfather had bequeathed him, face deliberately neutral, but gaze watchful, analysing every individual in the venue like a hunter evaluating possible dangers. He wore a charcoal dress shirt that fit devastatingly well, custom-made to accentuate every line, effortlessly commanding attention the moment he arrived. He never had to work for it. And that reality made everything worse. Women noticed him instinctively, automatically, as though he possessed gravitational pull, and they were all satellites helplessly orbiting in his atmosphere. "There's nothing you need to validate," he muttered, tone strained with something he wouldn't acknowledge. "Nothing you need to demonstrate to anyone, especially not to yourself." Naomi lifted an eyebrow, rotating to face him with a blend of bewilderment and resolve. "Isn't that precisely why we've been doing all of this? Every drill, every exercise? Unless," she grinned, attempting to dispel his suddenly heavy mood, "unless you're worried I'll excel beyond expectations, worried I'll transform into some irresistible force and completely forget you exist." He gave her a look, jaw clenched tight enough that she could observe the tension there, and something in his expression made her stomach drop. "Do what you please, Naomi. Just don't anticipate me intervening when some jerk makes his move. Don't expect rescue when complications arise." She rolled her eyes, suppressing the flutter of something in her chest at his guarded tone. "Understood. Observe and be impressed, Professor. Let's see if your student learned anything." She identified her prospect swiftly, methodically, exactly as Daehyun had instructed her to evaluate a space and pinpoint viable targets. A man near the bar counter, well-groomed with a relaxed smile, tastefully dressed without appearing overdone, nursing what appeared to be an old-fashioned by himself. Perfect, accessible but not lonely, handsome, but not arrogant. Precisely the type of rehearsal situation Daehyun had outlined. Naomi inhaled deeply, corrected her stance the way they'd drilled countless times, drew her shoulders backward, elevated her chin marginally, and crossed the room with whatever confidence she could summon. She settled onto the bar stool adjacent to him, positioning her body somewhat in his direction, but not excessively, maintaining distance, projecting availability without aggression. "Hey there," she said, voice gentler and more intentionally melodic than typical, the inflection they'd practiced until it became second nature. She angled her head just slightly, allowing her coils to tumble across one shoulder in that gesture Daehyun had shown her, the one he claimed drew focus to the collarbone. "Rough evening." The man glanced sideways, visibly surprised to be engaged, then smiled, curiosity plain in how his expression brightened, how his posture shifted toward hers. "Getting significantly better," he responded smoothly, and Naomi nearly celebrated internally. "It's functioning." The training actually functioned. They conversed casually, comfortably, the exchange progressing more smoothly than she'd anticipated. She inquired about his beverage, using it as a gateway to discover more. He praised her appearance, her vitality, the quality of her laugh. Naomi remembered to maintain visual connection the way Daehyun had emphasized repeatedly, to respond at appropriate moments, to generate brief silences that encouraged him to bridge the gap, to periodically touch her own hair or throat in those subtle movements that Daehyun had explained communicated receptiveness. She was succeeding. She was genuinely flirting, and it was effective, and she experienced a surge of triumph, of affirmation, of evidence that she could be perceived as appealing, executed. Every smile she bestowed upon that stranger, every instance she tilted closer to hear him above the music. His fingers gripped his tumbler with such force, his knuckles had blanched, and he was reasonably convinced if he applied any additional pressure, the glass would fracture in his grasp. Every time she laughed at something that man uttered, something acute and excruciating wrenched in Daehyun's chest, in his core, radiating through his body like venom. When the stranger's fingers grazed Naomi's forearm gently, casually, in a gesture that was obviously probing limits, obviously gauging her receptivity to contact, something inside Daehyun fractured entirely. He was standing before rational thought, intercepted physical impulse. Before he could dissuade himself, before he could recall all the justifications, this was catastrophic. He traversed the lounge with the assurance of someone who controlled the establishment, who controlled the entire district, who had never encountered refusal in his existence. The man looked up, smile wavering slightly, just as Daehyun positioned an arm around Naomi's waist with fluid, intentional, unmistakable ownership, drawing her against his frame, staking his claim before everyone observing. "She's unavailable," Daehyun stated in flawless frigid Korean, his inflection measured and absolutely conclusive, permitting no debate or compromise. The man blinked, bewildered, clearly attempting to comprehend the abrupt arrival of what was evidently competition. "Oh, damn. Sorry, man. I had no clue she was spoken for. She never mentioned it." "You're aware now," Daehyun interjected, and the frost in his delivery, the shadows in his gaze clarified. This wasn't a recommendation or plea, it was an undeniable fact. The man lifted his palms in capitulation, retreating instantly, and muttered something about locating his companions before vanishing into the masses with impressive velocity. Naomi stared up at Daehyun, eyes enormous with astonishment, and something else, something that accelerated her pulse. What on earth was that? Her voice emerged breathless despite her attempts to sound irritated. He gazed down at her, still maintaining her close enough that she could sense every portion of him aligned with her side. close enough that she could detect his fragrance and feel his racing heartbeat. I mentioned not to anticipate rescue. That wasn't rescuing, she protested, attempting to disregard how correct it felt to be held by him, how her body seemed to align flawlessly with his. That was complete interference. He was pleasant. We were simply conversing, experimenting with everything you instructed. Daehyun's jaw tightened so severely, she feared he might damage his teeth. Conversing? His voice descended dangerously, rough with barely restrained emotion. He was touching you, making contact. It was my arm, Dae, she scoffed, pushing lightly against his chest, but not genuinely attempting to escape, not genuinely wanting him to release her. It was minimal contact, and relax. Why are you even reacting like this? Isn't this what you intended, to validate your training? Succeeded, to demonstrate I could attract interest? Something dangerous flickered in his eyes, then something raw and desperate and completely exposed. But he composed his expression swiftly, professionally, the way he executed in corporate negotiations when he needed to conceal his thoughts. He thrust his hands into his pockets, physically compelling himself to cease touching her before he committed something reckless. Disregard it. This was an error. We should leave. Absolutely not, she declared obstinately, anchoring herself, refusing dismissal. Not until you provide the truth. Not until you clarify why you just frightened away the first man who's regarded me like that in ages, the first man who actually appeared interested. Why you persist in doing this? Silence expanded between them, dense and saturated with everything unspoken, with years of meticulously preserved boundaries and suppressed emotions. The commotion of the lounge, the music and dialogues and laughter dissolved into oblivion. His stare immobilized her, dark and concentrated and completely inscrutable. Then, in a voice scarcely audible above a whisper, ragged with emotion he could no longer conceal, he stated, because imagining anyone else touching you, anyone else provoking that laugh from you, anyone else possessing even a fragment of what I crave drives me absolutely insane, because I cannot tolerate observing you smile at other men the way I desperately wish you'd smile at me. Naomi's breath seized in her throat, halted completely, her heart hammering against her ribs so forcefully it physically ached. The world seemed to rotate sideways, reality transforming into something unprecedented, something she'd never contemplated, despite all the signals she'd apparently been overlooking. Before she could respond, before she could process what he'd just confessed, Daehyun pivoted and strode toward the exit with rapid, furious steps, abandoning her standing there amid the crowded lounge, stunned, trembling, and more disoriented than she'd ever been in her entire existence. That night, Naomi lay in her bed, gazing at the ceiling, replaying his words repeatedly, like a melody trapped on loop. Because imagining anyone else touching you drives me absolutely insane. She should have been furious at his interference, at his possessiveness, at how he'd sabotaged what might have been a successful evening. Instead, warmth spiraled low in her abdomen, spreading through her body in waves that had nothing to do with stilettos or flirtation training or becoming someone different. Warmth that was entirely about Daehyun, about how he'd regarded her, about how he'd sounded when he'd admitted he couldn't tolerate observing her with someone else. For the first time in her existence, Naomi wasn't certain she wanted to attract any arbitrary man. Perhaps she didn't need instruction at all. Perhaps what she desired had been directly before her the entire time, concealed behind amicable smiles and patient coaching and meticulously regulated reactions. Perhaps she simply wanted Daehyun. Perhaps she'd always wanted Daehyun, and perhaps all these sessions had been his method of revealing, of preparing her, of hoping she'd finally recognize what he'd been too terrified to articulate directly. She rotated over, burying her face in her pillow, equally horrified and exhilarated, because if Dae-hyun wanted her the way she was beginning to suspect he did, the way his confession indicated he did, everything was about to transform between them. Everything they'd carefully constructed over years of friendship was about to shift into something completely different, something dangerous and exciting and absolutely terrifying. And the most frightening aspect was that she wanted it to transform. She wanted it desperately. Thank you for watching. What do you think will happen next? Will Naomi finally acknowledge her feelings? Will Dae-hyun explain why he agreed to teach her in the first place? Find out in episode 2, coming soon. If you're new here, we'd love to know you better. So leave us a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Who knows, our next story might come from your home country. If you enjoyed this video, take a moment to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you don't miss our next release.